Hello guys, and welcome back to the client case study series. Today we're going to be covering Harpreet. So Harpreet is a vegetarian business owner, as in he's a vegetarian that owns a business. He doesn't own a business making vegetarians. And he works some of the longest hours of anyone I've ever worked with, really. So his business is in the wedding and events industry. So obviously he works weekends, 7-day weeks, crazy long days. And he basically came to me saying, look, I've been training for years and years. I'm very, very careful with my diet, but I'm not really very happy with the way that my physique looks. And I'm looking to achieve a physique that is representative of the effort that I put in and also improve, my energy and my mental sharpness that's going to carry over, into my business. So when we sat down, we basically had to assess, look, what is it we're currently doing now? What's holding us back? And what are the areas of low-hanging fruit that we can identify that are going to reliably improve your results? So when we sat down and went through it, we found that he was someone that was spending, actually, given his busy schedule, a lot of time in the gym. But a lot of it wasn't actually that specific to the goal that he was looking to achieve. And this is something that we see very, very often with incoming new clients. They'll say, look, I want to be lean, muscular and strong, but they're doing, high rocks, they're doing sport-specific training. Harpreet was doing boxing, loads of stuff designed to make him a better boxer, even though it wasn't something that he was actively looking to progress in. He was more concerned with his physique. He just wasn't putting the effort into the most efficient path to getting to where he wanted to get to, which was obviously lean and muscular. And then from a nutrition perspective, he was actually sort of fairly overweight when we started. I think he started off at just under 90 kg. And what we identified was that he was sort of hyper-fixated on the quality of his nutrition. So not only was he vegetarian, but he was really, really concerned with making sure that everything was, organic and really healthy. And he was hyper-fixated on how good or clean the food he was eating was. But what he wasn't applying were the basic principles of improving his body composition. So he wasn't dedicating specific periods to being in a calorie deficit. He was getting nowhere near enough protein. Incidentally, vegetarians, what we have to do in order to get a complete protein source, which means all of the amino acids are hitting the correct ratios with each meal, you actually have to combine different proteins, different protein sources. So you might have to use, for instance, grains with legumes in order to basically take two incomplete protein sources and get a complete serving of protein. So yeah, things are much easier if you eat animal protein, but he doesn't. So these are the main things we had to look at. We had to say, well, look, you're not actually dedicating, serious amounts of time to being in a calorie deficit. You're just sort of focusing on eating well, and your physique is pretty stagnant or is actively regressing. And a lot of the time that he was spending in the gym, again, wasn't particularly stimulative of muscle growth. So he's putting in a lot of effort, but he wasn't really seeing any outcomes because a lot of what he was doing in the gym wasn't focused on taking, the target muscle close to momentary muscular failure. He wasn't accumulating enough volume per week of effective sets, and he didn't really have a structure. It was jumping around, it was different every week, so a lot of time and energy was being invested into his physique, but he wasn't really seeing any results. So we sat down, we mapped things out and said, look, where do we want to be? What are the bottlenecks that are holding you back, and how are we going to work around them? So we came up with his nutrition protocols. We came up with a revised approach to training that he took to really, really well. What is great about Harpreet is his work ethic is absolutely next level. You don't get to become a really successful business owner without some degree of drive. And what we found is once he had, a training program that made sense and that adapted with him and that he had numerical evidence of progression with, he really took to it. And we saw his physique change very, very rapidly. So obviously we started off with a fairly serious fat loss phase. So we started off, just under 90 kg. And yeah, not really looking great considering the amount of time that he'd spent in the gym and, over a decade of training that had gone into building that physique. So we started losing pretty steadily, 1% of body weight per week. And we had to be pretty sensible with this. He was a guy with serious hours at work. Over the time that I've worked with him, we've had to adjust his training splits, sometimes dropping down to, 3 days per week in order to reflect busier periods, having to hold periods at maintenance when he needed his energy for putting that into his work. And we basically had to adjust to the ebbs and flow of his work life. But we gradually got him into a leaner and leaner position, and with a approach to training that was reflective of his needs. We actually saw pretty significant muscle growth along the road, despite losing, in total, a lot of body weight. So he dropped from, when we first started off, he was in the region of 90 kg, and he got all the way down to around about 72. Okay, so he ended up in absolutely fantastic shape, and he was so pleased to be able to finally get, the physique that the effort that he'd been putting in over the years had basically, deserved, but just wasn't being, orientated in the most efficient manner possible. And this is basically something that we see all the time. People are focused very hard on their nutrition, but they just focus on eating clean. They don't focus on, is what I'm eating actually adding up to the outcome on a weekly, monthly basis that I'm aiming for at the moment? And, is my time in the gym? Harpreet was very focused on, I want to sweat, I want to work hard, but he wasn't sort of looking at, how many hard sets am I doing per week? How do I optimize my execution of every set exercise that I'm doing in the gym in order to maximize the time efficiency of my training? And that's what we really focused on. It was just making him more efficient with the effort he was putting in. We had to bump up that protein intake pretty drastically. As you heard, we had to sort of combine some fairly weird food sources in order to make sure that he was getting, that even distribution of all the amino acids. And we had to make sure that we had a longer term plan that made some sense. Previously, I think he'd always been trying to build muscle and lose fat at pretty much the same time. And, it is possible to achieve body recomposition, but if you've been training for a long time and you're not making any significant changes to your training stimulus, it's unlikely to be a powerful enough driver of change for you to lose, in his case, 18 kilos of body fat. He was never going to lose that much through body recomp, but he'd never sat down and said, in the same way that you would, if you're setting up a business, you want to grow it, you would set up a business plan. He'd never sat down and said, look, if I want to get lean and muscular, I've got a lot of body fat to lose, and I'm not going to lose that by gaining half pound of muscle a year and losing half pound of body fat, or he would have done, but it would have taken him 36 years. And this is one of the mistakes people will make. They'll know that they're nowhere near where they want to be, but they don't know what the next move is. Should they bulk? Should they cut? What they need to do their training. So they try and do everything and nothing at the same time. And I think that's where Harpreet really benefited from this process, because he was someone that was so used to being in control of everything that having to also sort of come up with a proper periodized approach to his own training nutrition, which is incidentally something he absolutely loved, was basically a bit of a bridge too far. And he was constantly just putting in work, but not really getting anywhere with it. So we got him really lean. For most of that process, we essentially used a 5-day training split. So we used a legs, pull, push, upper, lower split. This was then modified as we went along and became a little bit more sort of like individualized as he got leaner and leaner. And like I said, he ended up in absolutely fantastic shape. And then from that point, we then steadily reversed his calories up, spent time sort of in the building phases, and we've now got him in a position where, he can now diet down and get into even better shape than he has previously. The truth is that, the path has not been a straight one for him. It has been tricky. He's had months where he's barely been able to get in the gym. So it hasn't been like, some of the people we work with, they're like, yeah, all I want to do is get in fucking great shape. When we work with like high level natural bodybuilders, those type of people, they are willing, you're going to get 6 months and they won't miss a session. And they will tell you if they go 10 grams over on the carbohydrates or whatever. Whereas working with someone that has got, a huge amount of energy and time going into their other endeavors is probably a little bit more realistic of the everyday person. And it just shows what can be achieved even if you've got a huge amount on your plate. A lot of people will make the excuse that they are busy. They've got kids, they've got a business, they've got all of these things going on. So I even hear people say, I can't get in shape because I'm Asian. Do you know what I mean? Like, by the way, that is typically not necessarily just a genetic thing, more of a lifestyle thing. A lot of Asian guys don't have the best lifestyles, best nutritional practices, and this is one of the reasons that some of them struggle to get in shape. But as you see with Harpreet, despite having often, minimal sleep, despite working crazy hours, despite being vegetarian and, dare I say, Asian, got into absolutely unbelievable shape. So it does really show that if you are willing to, invest and put that work in, pretty much anyone in any circumstance can get into fantastic shape. But, you need a plan. You need to be willing to accept that what you are doing is not getting you there, and you need to sit down and address those issues. Very often there'll be elements that people want to focus on. They'll want to find new bicep variations, but they don't want to accept the fact that they need to actually eat less if they're going to lose body fat. And what Harpreet did really well is he was very open to being coached. So I would tell him, look, this is the plan for this phase, this is the rate we need to be losing, these are the calories we need to be eating, which incidentally ended up pretty low in that initial fat loss phase. And he always stuck to it. He executed to the highest level that he was able to. And he didn't get upset or, down on himself when he wasn't able to be perfect. Because truthfully, in real life situations, coaching real life busy people, you often can't be perfect. You just have to do enough to keep productive, keep moving forward, and sometimes accept that even maintaining during a busy week or month might actually still be, in the long run, a pretty good outcome.